Well, I got my start like virtually everyone does at the very bottom. So I started as editorial assistant at Who magazine back when Who was more newsy and human interest and a little bit of celebrity, so way back. I'd done a couple of jobs before then. I worked for a Japanese newspaper and I was the phone girl on 2UE. I think in the beginning you just try and really get as much experience as you can, and then once you land somewhere where you feel comfortable, then you sort of look at how you're going to progress. And for me, the big thing at Who, which I absolutely loved that magazine, back then it was like a pop culture version of Time, I realised I knew I wanted to be a writer. So I would, in my spare time, write stories on anything. Any of the editors who I could pester to write something for, I would write for them. And that was my deal with my boss. So he said, do your glorified secretarial work during the day, and then after hours you can write whatever you want. And they actually paid me extra for those writing pieces. They were the glory days of journalism, let me tell you. And yeah, just kept writing and writing until I got the next leg up. So I just started getting promoted there. And then I just sort of thought, well, what's the next stage of my career? And I want to be an editor. So every step I took was sort of an attempt to do that. I don't think I was super strategic about my career, but I think if you work hard and you're passionate and you have great ideas and you surround yourself with the right people, that's obviously a huge plus. QANTAS, this is my 5th editing role, so I've edited 5 magazines in that time. So we're talking about a span of 20 odd years. QANTAS just came about because a lot of people, obviously I know a lot of people in the industry. QANTAS was transferring over from a previous publisher to Medium Rare, which is the agency I now work for. And they were looking to completely reboot the way they do travel content. And so, yes, I just got a very nice call one day. I had a very glamorous job editing InStyle fashion magazine. And I'd just flown in from New York, and it sounds horribly glamorous. I was staying in one of the best hotels in New York. It was snowing outside, and I had small children at home, and I was a bit miserable with all the travel. And I got this call, and I was like, that timing could not be more perfect. So I'm the only travel editor who doesn't like to travel too much. We very quickly went, okay, we've got a real problem. There's not going to be planes in the air, and we've got a magazine, and we had a lot of revenue attached to that April issue where it was just about to go on planes. So we knew that we had to get that magazine out there somehow. And so fortunately, we have a very strong relationship with Qantas Airline and Qantas Loyalty. And the team at Loyalty very quickly agreed that we could send, we're now doing 40,000 copies of the magazine directly to the homes of the top frequent flyers. So the most affluent frequent flyers, Chairman's Lounge, Platinum One, Select Platinum, they're now getting the magazine home delivered to them. And so that saved our model during the pandemic. It meant that we could protect that revenue, and we could still be providing content for people who wanted to fly most. And then, of course, all that content that we're doing is, of course, going on digital. We're doing a digital edition of the magazine, so no one feels like they're missing out. And we're obviously looking at how we can get back on board as quickly as possible. But if I look back over the past year, well, we're only one of 2 magazines in the world, in-flight magazines in the world, that have continued publishing post-COVID. So that's, pretty extraordinary to have published that whole way through without a break. How we did it from a production process, well, you're bringing back some bad memories for me, because you might remember in those early days, things were changing so quickly. And obviously I had to have a very small team working on QANTAS, because we weren't suddenly doing those big 250-page magazines. To send a magazine and not have it cost gazillions of dollars in postage, we were doing a smaller magazine. So I was fortunate in that I was able to move a lot of the team around the company, so people didn't lose their jobs as much as we could possibly protect. And then the remaining few people who remained on QANTAS were just solely focused on how we can deliver that content that was as relevant as possible. And that's where it gets tricky, because things were changing so quickly. So one moment everyone, wanted to, still dream about overseas. And then when that became absolutely not a reality at all, we had to very quickly move to deserted type holidays you could get to. And then when borders were closing, we couldn't do that. So there were times when my team of, 7 people working on the magazine in that period, part-time, were doing 3 different editions of the magazine before we actually sent it out, just simply because of the changing nature of what was going on around us and our desire to be absolutely as relevant as possible. Because, I said to the team at the time, I said, we actually have to be better than we've ever been before, because right now all eyes are on us. Are we doing a good job? Does this matter? How do we keep publishing? So we had to be the best we could be, which, meant, a week out from deadline, I was saying, guess what? We've got the content wrong. We have to change everything. So I was pretty popular that week, let me tell you. My team, they've been amazing. My QANTAS team particularly, everyone who I'm working with at the moment, because there's a lot of demands right now. But when I look at that QANTAS team, they've been so decimated, and they've just willingly put in the hours. They've changed titles, 3 times in 1 month. So we've just chopped and changed the whole way. And that's been really very, very long hours for them. But what I love about them is that they always want to do everything at their best. So it's like, how can we make sure this is the very best it can be? And there's a lot of, we send stories back to writers all the time. We ask lots of questions. We add breakouts to stories. We can things like, there's a lot of, there's a lot that goes into that magazine. A story just never just sails through, or very rarely. And I just think that absolute laser focus on quality is what has seen us succeed in a magazine industry that has been challenged up until COVID. It's seen us succeed during COVID, when travel has been virtually non-existent at times. And I think it will 100% help us succeed again post-COVID, when we go back to being, the #1 magazine with so much revenue. How do we now rebuild to get us back to where we were? And I have absolute no doubt that team will make that happen, because of their absolute focus on quality. And that's what is missing. Like, there's lots of there's so much content out there now. You can get content everywhere, but where can you get quality content? It's why newspapers like the New York Times is succeeding again, because people are just desperate for quality. I think one of the things that has been the biggest change is the way we craft content. So, once upon a time, back when I was doing other magazines, we'd all just sit around and talk about what people were talking about, and, what should we, come up with these ideas and hear things through our networks. And I think that still plays a very important role in journalism, because, especially for news journalism, obviously, but even for lifestyle journalism, because I think that journalists have a very uncanny knack of knowing when a topic is burbling and bubbling away and is going to get hot. And they hear things on the ground and they know that something's going to happen. And I think that whole surprise element of lifestyle content is very important. So we'll never neglect that sort of magical storytelling that great journalists have. But where the biggest shift has been, obviously, is in SEO-led content. And I think we've always done that ever since I moved over to Medium Rare in 2015. So we've always done SEO-led content. But I think that's an area where people weren't necessarily doing as much of it. Pre-COVID, the digital transformation has been so huge, obviously. And I think for me, even though we did it a lot, we've done it even more now. So, we obviously we get data from QANTAS on where people are flying or where they're looking into flying. So we've always used that. But we were really, during COVID, looking at what people were actually searching for in terms of their travel. Because at one point, everyone wanted to go off into a tiny house and be away from everyone because they perceived it to be safe. And then at some point, that was like, oh, actually, I don't want to do that anymore. I want to gather together with my friends and celebrate us all being together. So it's using search to really ascertain at what point that's changing and make sure we're ahead of it so that we're there for it. It's using data. So once upon a time, journalists just did that by instinct. And I still think that's important, because we rely on our network of travel writers to tell us when something new's open, it's fabulous, and that's not going to come up on search anywhere. And we need to tell, our readers about sort of new emerging areas and things that aren't figuring on search. But we also really rely now on the data to make sure we're really fulfilling that content need. But when you're talking about transitioning print journalists, particularly to digital, the only way you can really do it is just make them do digital. To get their heads thinking in a different way, because they are two very different mediums. And it's a real journey, I think, to take the print team, which is what I have done, and get them working on digital and getting them to think about SEO-led content. There's just a shift, and it takes time, and it's not automatic, but you really just got to force them into to doing digital and seeing how it operates and seeing how that content resonates. I mean, I don't think there is such a thing as a print journalist anymore, or very rare that you'll find a job where you'll just be doing print. You know, I spent nearly 10 years at Fairfax, which is now 9, and all of those journalists are all filing content for online. They're writing, you know, metadata. They're writing, you know, they're doing A/B testing on headlines. Some of them are doing video content. They're certainly contributing to social media. Like, these skills, they're not a nice to have. Like, if you don't have them, you just won't succeed. The flip side of that is that, you know, when I am looking for people to join our organisation, because obviously Qantas is just one part of what I do. I run the travel and luxury division at Medium Rare. When I'm looking for people to join other brands or Qantas, what I see is that often the old print journalists don't always have the digital skills, but the digital journalists don't have the quality skills. And so that's the real flip side for me. Like, I'm always going, who is mentoring these young journalists who are coming up through the ranks? We've got these amazing digital skills, but if you're going to be writing content for one of the most iconic brands in Australia, your writing has to be A1. And that's hugely important. But similarly, you need all of those digital skills to succeed now, 100%. If you don't have them, you won't have a role. I don't think I've ever told this story before, but I was interviewing Jeremy Irons, and he at the time had done Lolita and another film about Hong Kong and taking over Hong Kong. And I was, you know, I don't know, journalist number 10 or whatever it was, and I had 25 minutes. And I was interviewing him about Lolita and the other film, and he asked me a question about the other film. And he said something about, I can't remember what he said, but it was basically a trick question. It was, well, what do you think when the dog died? And I said, I don't remember the dog dying. The dog didn't die. What are you talking about? And he said, oh, good. So you saw the movie. So the 9 journalists prior to me had all watched Lolita, because that was the sort of sexy, you know, big movie that was going to get all the press. And they hadn't watched the other film that he was obviously much more passionate about. So once he'd ascertained that I'd seen both films, he was very open. We had a great chat. And then towards the, maybe 3/4 of the way through the interview, I was wearing sandals. And this is a bit of a weird story to tell, but anyway. I have a very long second toe, very long, much longer than my big toe. And he looked down at my feet and he said, oh my goodness, look at that second toe. And I said, well, it's a sign of intelligence, you know, apparently in Roman times. And anyway, we ended up chatting about my mutant toe for at least 5 minutes. And I'm thinking, oh my God, I've only got 25 minutes in this interview. Anyway, he ended up giving me some extra time. And it was a great interview, and he was very charming, but it was just a real lesson in doing your research. The one thing I've really learned, they really respond well when they can see you've done the research. It just makes such a difference to the interview and to what you get. Because if you can go back to something that someone has said 5 years ago they've never repeated, there's another layer that they can add onto that now, and there's more nuance. And they're just much more open when they can tell that you've got a genuine interest in what they're doing, as opposed to you've got half an hour and you're just scratching it out. And I just think that's where you get those more deep responses. Or you get Jeremy Irons talking about your toes. Look, there's been a lot of highlights in my own personal career, but actually to me, if I look back over the past, 25 years or whatever it's been, the highlight is always putting together the teams. Because when you have the right team, and you learn a lot of lessons as well from when you get the wrong people in the team. But when you have the right team, there is a kind of magic that happens. And it can sound a bit airy-fairy, but when you have like-minded people who are all striving for the same thing creatively, and there's a bit of argy-bargy sometimes, and that's important, it's just, you're so tight-knit. And it is honestly, I look back at all the teams I've had over the years, and they've all gone on to do such different things. And probably for me, that's been one of the most satisfying things, I think. From a low light perspective, look, it's hard to go past COVID. I mean, I think we'll look back on COVID and we'll take all the lessons, and there's no doubt in my mind that we are stronger, better, faster, smarter than we were 15 months ago. But, I can't tell a lie. It has been a scramble, and there have been some pretty dark days, working in travel. In a pandemic, it's definitely had its challenges. And I was editing a women's magazine, a lifestyle magazine called B back in the day, and that was around just after 2000. There was a very successful magazine in the UK called Glamour who took their magazine down to handbag size. And we did the same thing for B. B was struggling a bit. It was up against Clio and Cosmo. It came out with a bang, but that market was quite fragmented. And we decided to follow their lead and do exactly the same thing in this market. And you know what? I realised later that the reason that the publisher at the time was so keen on it was because they could see cost savings. And so they didn't really do it for the right reasons. And so we ended up with quite a thin little small magazine, which was exactly the opposite of what it should be. If you're going to go smaller, you've got to go fatter. You've got to give people value and make sure it's packed full of information. I was quite a new editor at that point as well. So I think probably I really learned some lessons there about, you know, what's in it for the consumer. That always has to be first. It's always looking at how are we going to find solutions that is ultimately going to be the making of that magazine. Because in the end, it was kind of the death knell of the magazine because less people bought it because they perceived it was lower value. So it wasn't a smart publishing decision. And I think in the end, probably what I learned from that is, yes, trust your instincts, but yes, find some other solutions. Don't just go with the flow. If there are cost implications, then you've got to find another way around. There's always a way around if you're smart about it. And so that's probably the lesson I took from it. I think that the conversation needs to be about how we can help women continue to grow. And that's whether it's in media or in business, you know, like how do we get more women in leadership positions? That's number one, right? Like we know that there are balance sheet advantages when you have a board that has more women, when you have, you know, an ELT, an executive leadership team that has more women. So these are really important conversations. And sometimes you do feel like you're having that conversation over and over. I mean, you know, one of the things that I do at QANTAS in the business section is we have a leadership column where I interview a CEO every month. And I always ensure that it's female 1 month, male the next, female 1 month, male the next, just to make sure that we're getting those female voices heard and it becomes more visible and more obvious that there are plenty of amazing women leaders out there. In magazines, it's true that there are more women working in magazines. Unfortunately, there aren't as many women leading magazine companies, and that's always been a challenge. But I think in terms of tangible things you can do, you know, role model is a big part of how you can help other women. So if you are at a leadership position, how do you role model to be helping other women to realise that, well, A, you can do it. You know, I've managed a very busy career and very, very long hours and a lot of travel with 2 small children, and I've always worked full time without sacrificing my family because that's important to me. So I make sure that I try and role model where I can flexibility. You know, I've just moved to Hobart. I'm running the business from Hobart. I do Hobart 10 days a week, Sydney 4 days a week. So I'm still visible a lot in the Sydney office, but I'm showing you can have a different lifestyle and still be a leader. I think that it's about teaching women and talking to them about what they're doing right and what they're doing wrong. One of the things that I really see a lot of women doing is sitting back. So they're not leaning in meetings. I know that's, you know, whole Sheryl Sandberg thing, but it's so true. Like how many times have I sat in meetings and the men are doing all the talking and the women are quiet? And I know that they can be intimidated by those meetings, but I always say to them, best thing I can tell you and what I've done myself is if you are in a meeting where you feel completely intimidated, the first chance you have to speak and just get it over and done with, because once you start talking, then you've lost that fear and you just keep going. So I think it's about just pulling people up in a really kind way about ways they can improve to help them on that, you know, leadership journey, if you like. And then I think the other tangible thing that women can do is actively promote other women. It's sometimes hard when you have amazing team members and you don't want to lose them because they add so much value to what you do. But if you can see an opportunity where they can really flourish, I think that that's your duty, is to promote them in other networks and support them in that journey. Like one of the things that I really like to talk to women about is I like to take a real interest in people's careers and talk about their careers and encourage them to drive their own career. Because that's the other thing I think sometimes women can do, and I've probably been guilty of in the past as well, sitting back and waiting until, you know, the magic job offer appears. You have to drive your career. So if you see something you want, how can I help you go and get that? Like, what steps do you need to take? What network do you need to achieve? Who do you need to go and talk to? What extra training do you need to get? So I think it's about having those conversations. And if you can't have that conversation with your boss, which many people feel they cannot, then that's where you need someone you trust, where you can go and say to them, look, I'm in a bit of a career rut. This is what I need. This is what I want to do. Can you give me some tangible ways that I can make that happen? One of my first bosses at Who Magazine, Tom Moore, he was just fantastic support to me and really encouraged me to, give writing a go. And, he was tough, but he really just encouragement is often what you need at a young age, I think. And that belief that you can do it. And he opened a few doors to me internally as well. And I think that's really important. I actually get a lot of value out of the people I work most directly with. One of my editors at the moment, Jackie Lunn, who I've known for 20 odd years, she and I just talk about things all the time and bounce ideas off each other. And I just think having that someone you see quite regularly, where you can often just bounce ideas off, is really important. My best friend is Kelly Hush. She was the editor-in-chief of Harper's Bazaar. And we see each other, all the time. And I mean, we were both editing a fashion magazine at the same time. It never felt competitive. And she's someone, again, who I'm always, if I have a problem, I just pick up the phone. Women, though, we talk, right? You need those people you trust who, will give you real advice and not tell you what you think you want to hear.